Hi, I'm Sean. I've always had a passion for personal growth and a curiosity for life's profound questions. I created this show as a platform dedicated to inspiring change through thoughtful and insightful conversation. There's a lot happening in our world today. Some of it clear, some of it confusing. My goal with these conversations is to leave you feeling better and more informed about the state of our world in these challenging times. I'd like to invite you to think outside the lines. Hello, beautiful people, and thank you so very much for joining me today. My guest today has worked globally promoting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and furthering democracy. His work has taken many forms, including writing and producing an award-winning documentary on learning about the Holocaust at the concentration camps in Poland, working on the Ghanaian Constitution, coordinating and producing events leading to Ukrainian independence, producing events for the first AIDS Day treatment center in the nation, pushing for the decriminalization of homosexuality in Ukraine, the first Soviet republic to do so. Currently, he serves as the executive director of the Stonewall National Museum and Archives, where he connects his LGBTQ+ community engagement with a commitment to utilizing history to shape our response to today and tomorrow. I invite you to think outside the lines with Robert Kesten. Robert Kesten, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
I'm really excited to chat with you today. I feel like this is going to be a really inspiring episode for our listeners. I'd love if you could start with a bit about your journey and what is motivating you to make the world a better place.
What is motivating me? Two things. One was the fact that I had a pretty good life. My parents were able to provide, and they instilled in me the notion that when you have good things, you have an obligation to give back. And then when I became a parent and wanting my children to live in the kind of world that I would want to live in.
Your work spans various countries and causes, and not the least of which, includes your efforts with respect to furthering democracy. I'd love if you could talk a bit about what ignited your passion for some of these issues.
Well, it became very clear to me early on that those people who make the biggest difference in the world are the ones who give of themselves. And I was, I guess, lucky at a very, very young age to meet Robert Kennedy. And he was running for the United States Senate in New York. And it was an inspirational moment, even though I was too young to really appreciate it at the time. But it was those kinds of people, the Martin Luther King Jr.'s, the Bobby Kennedys, the Eleanor Roosevelts, that always were an inspiration. And as I became older and learned more about history, the Abraham Lincolns and the Frederick Douglasses. And although I could not possibly aspire to reach their achievements, I felt that I would feel better about myself and the world that I lived in if I followed, at least in part, in their footsteps.
That's beautiful. So as it pertains to the current political landscape, I feel like there's a lot of directions we could go in that realm, but I guess specifically, I'm curious, what do you see as the most important issues facing the LGBTQ+ community going into 2024?
For me, the most important thing is the preservation of democracy. Without that, our options become extraordinarily limited and our freedoms likewise. And without the ability to live in a country, to be part of a country where governance is of, by, and for the people, even if that's a struggle to maintain, it is the one thing that gives us hope for going forward. If we lose that as a possibility, if we lose the options that come with a democratic republic, we're in much bigger trouble, and our freedoms, our liberties, our dignity are no longer even partially guaranteed. So preserving and strengthening our democracy, I think, is the most important thing.
I would agree with you. Something I find myself thinking about quite often, actually, is Trump, obviously, right? I think he takes up way too much time and bandwidth for most of us. But as it pertains specifically to, the deterioration, let's call it, of democracy, specifically in the United States, I'm very curious to know, because it's not just one person that did this, right? It feels sometimes like, it's been intensified over the last, 5-6 years or so. What do you think led to this in the United States? It can't just be one man in his quest for, lifelong power.
It's certainly not one individual. There are
Yeah.
many people that are behind the movement of denying the vote, denying options to the general public. There's a great book called Democracy in Chains, which really gives you a history of that movement, at least in modern times, but it goes back to before Nixon was president, probably back to post-World War II era, and how they organized and how they laid out their plans. And it's a real timeline history with tremendous amount of information that shows that where we are today is not because of an individual, most definitely, but because of complacency, because of not learning history, because of not learning the lessons of history. Everything that is happening today has happened historically before. What the difference is the technology and the ability to get a message out that appeals to people who are frightened, who appeals to people who want to keep things the way they are, and appeals to people who would like to regress in time because they have convinced themselves that those times were better, even though they were not.
What role has technology played in all of this? Because I feel that it's played a rather prominent role, especially as of late.
Well, technology has played a major role, and that is because human beings only develop and change so fast. As we see in nature, biological changes take time. Technology does not take that time, and technology changes at an unbelievably rapid pace. And what has happened is the technology advances go far beyond what the average human being is able to adhere to. So the technology has become the tool that has made us its tool. So we are using technology the way the technology companies want us to use the technology, rather than using technology as a tool to make our lives a better place to live. And therefore, the things that make us human, person-to-person communication, being in real time and real space, being outside in nature, are diminished because technology is telling us to stay glued to our screens. That is terribly unhealthy and has led to a greater lack of health mentally and physically across all of our societies.
Yeah. The idea that we used to be more face to face, right? The idea that we weren't staring at a screen all day. I feel like that change has also caused us to be less sensitive to the world around us and less compassionate toward other people, right? Because we're not having those common interactions. And I feel like that all plays into this to some extent, right?
Absolutely. There's no question
Yeah.
that if you don't deal with people, there was even a study, I believe, that showed that young people who are growing up on screens really do not know how to read body language. And when you don't understand how people's movement, how their facial expressions are telling you something, you react oblivious to it. So people tell people they love them on a phone. They break up their relationships on a phone. They tell people to take out the garbage on the phone. There's no difference between any of those things when you're doing it through a text or through an email.
Yeah.
And when you're with a person and you look into their eyes and you tell them things, it is a completely different experience. We confuse issues. We confuse emotions. We confuse an understanding of what someone is telling us when they cross their legs or close their arms, because we don't understand it anymore because we're not exposed to it. So there was a study that showed that young people that grow up engulfed or enmeshed in technology often act as if they have autism because they can't read people. They don't understand the clues. And when you take the technology away from them for a good period of time, all those attributes that are associated with autism fade away. So we know that it's playing games with the brain. We know it's playing games with emotions. it is very unhealthy and leads to a very unhealthy society. And that's not to say that technology is bad. Technology can be good, but technology doesn't have a good or bad. It's how we use it. And right now, we're using it the way other people want us to use it for their advantage. And that's not good.
While we're on the topic of democracy, I do want to discuss Ukraine a bit, because I know you've done a lot of work there and I want to get into some of the specifics of that. But I think there's a divide in America right now that says we should be aiding Ukraine, and then there's people that say that we shouldn't from a financial standpoint and however else we're offering to help them. Can you explain to people why that's important for us to support them as it pertains to American democracy?
Anything that threatens democracy anywhere in the world is a threat to our own. Now, we certainly didn't always believe that, or we didn't believe it to the degree that we should believe it now. But in the last 6 to 8 years, we've seen a weakening of our own democracy, or maybe not so much a weakening, but a recognition of just how fragile it is. We also know that there are individuals, corporations, governments around the world that would like nothing better than to see the United States democracy fail. Every instance where democracies are challenged, where there are coups, where there is attacks, where there are wars that threaten democracies, even infantile democracies, even democracies that are not so strong, it is a threat to our own because it illuminates the weaknesses. It shows where the stress fractures are, and it doesn't give us a chance to really work out the differences and the policies necessary to strengthen our own democracy. We also know that the weaker we are here in the oldest, most stable, and wealthiest democracy, if we are threatened, if we fail, democracy will probably be lost in most of the world, if not all of the world. Those are huge, huge risks. And our quality of life, our ability to live freely as human beings will also be threatened, because dignity, human rights are all tied with the strength and the success of democracy.
Can you talk a bit about your role in pushing for the decriminalization of homosexuality in Ukraine? Because I think that's a really fascinating topic that most people probably aren't even familiar with.
Well, I was asked to go to Ukraine, and I did. And on my first or second day, I was given a tour of certain parts of Kyiv by the deputy prime minister. And we're driving through a park, and I noticed a building that was all boarded up. And to me, my first inclination was to think it was a public restroom. So why would it be boarded up? And so I said, what is that building and why is it all boarded up? And I was told by the deputy prime minister that the building was boarded up because certain types of people frequented that space and that they were not welcome in society. And even though the police would send hooligans in to beat them up, they would still return. So the only way to keep them out and to make the park safe was to close the building up so no one could have access. I did a little bit of research while I was there. It was hard. We didn't have computers. We didn't have the internet. And I discovered that homosexuality was a crime that could land you in a mental institution or in prison, including hard labor. And so I went back to the deputy prime minister and I said that I understand these are the repercussions for homosexuality here. And this was a word that he couldn't even say. So I said, I know it's difficult, but you want to become part of the West. You want democracy. You want individual liberties and freedoms. You can't do that if you stay where you are. And I have a plane ticket, so I'm willing to leave, but you've got to decriminalize. That's the minimum step you can take. And a few days later, he came back with the decree, making Ukraine the first, and at that point, pretty much only Soviet republic that decriminalized homosexuality. After their freedom from the Soviet Union, they were the only new nation within their environment to continue to keep decriminalization in place and to liberalize. And even now with the war going on, they have continued to pass legislation that gives LGBTQ plus people greater freedoms. Very unlike Russia, which has put criminalized laws back into effect and has arrested, intimidated, beaten, and jailed people of the community.
Can you talk more about the impact that this achievement has had on the LGBTQ plus community in terms of the rights in this region and how impactful that is and what that means?
Well, it has certainly tied Ukraine closer to the Western world, which was good for everybody until the war started. It gave people hope in other former Soviet republics where repression is still quite present and quite ruthless. And it gave some people, at least people living in Russia or Belarus, a place that they could go where they would have rudimentary freedoms. So what it did for gays and lesbians and bis and trans people in Ukraine, it gave them the rights of citizenship. It gave them the right to be who they are without fear of persecution. Yes, there's definitely homophobia. It's longstanding in those parts of the world like it is here. But they had recourse. They had the courts. They had government officials. It gave them a sense of being human beings. And that has made the difference. And now we see that the government and other entities within the country appreciate those contributions made by our community. So that's why they continue to liberalize the laws and give people more freedom, because they don't want them to leave. They are a benefit to the community. And they know that. And that is a shared joy, especially at a time when the country is under siege. You don't want to lose people. You certainly don't want to lose talented people. And that is the benefit and results of the decriminalization process.
As it pertains to homophobia specifically, obviously, we know this in the US, right? You can, just because something isn't criminalized doesn't mean that people accept it. Are there any efforts to create a different landscape of acceptance there? Or is it
absolutely.
just
There,
not illegal?
There are organizations, there are functioning organizations, there are funded organizations. So that process is ongoing. And I still remember speaking to a person who was young at the time who said I was one of those thugs that they would send in to beat these people up. And I have come to learn that that was a horrible thing. And it was a horrible thing that it was government-sponsored terrorism. And now I don't feel that way. My friends don't feel that way. And we understand that we're all Ukrainians. So yes, I think that that process happens when you liberalize the laws, when you make it known that people are part of the country, that they're citizens like you are, that it does over time dramatically change the perception and the welcoming. I think it goes beyond just feeling okay about it or saying, okay, you do that over there, but don't do it over here. I think that you become accepted, not just tolerated. You are a neighbor, a friend, a brother, a sister, a parent. You are what everybody else is. And I think that slowly but surely that has happened, and it will continue to happen because of their perception and understanding that these are people who contribute mightily to the community.
I think it's a really interesting topic as it pertains to like the length of time between acceptance and whatnot, because I think that's something that we're experiencing in the US. And I want to talk a little bit more about that because from my personal experience, I feel like I've been in the middle of kind of two different generations in that realm. And I'm really fascinated to kind of get your perspective on where things were versus where they're going. Obviously, a lot of that starts with Stonewall, and that's something that's become, a symbol of the LGBTQ plus rights and activism. Can you discuss its significance in the broader context of human rights and the struggle for equality?
Well, what's interesting is that there was a lot going on pre-Stonewall. And what also was starting to happen in the Stonewall era was the fact that once Stonewall happened, organizations started to spring up. And those organizations were activist organizations. They were organizations looking at government responsibility. They were justice-seeking organizations. And what happened, interestingly enough, is that people who worked in the women's movement, people who worked in civil rights, people who were working in the labor movement, people who were working for Jewish organizations or Christian organizations that were focused on social justice, started to see that they could work within the LGBTQ community. And so some right minds, some extraordinarily talented organizers, people like Bayard Rustin, for example, moved from where they were, where they didn't feel as welcome, into the LGBTQ plus community, where they brought tremendous level of skills, tremendous amounts of experience. And so we were able to move through that liberation process in some ways faster than many of the other groups because we got the best and the brightest. We also, because of those relationships, ended up with a good array of allies or friends or family that still lived in this other world. And they also ended up contributing mightily to our ability to accomplish our goals at record-breaking speed. Yes, sometimes that caused pushback, but in the long run, we are far better off now than we were back in 1969 or 1970 or 1980. We have organizations in Washington, in state capitals, in major cities, in towns and villages across this country that have well-trained, highly professional workers. And they are doing amazing things every day, keeping us in the news, keeping us aware, making us assured that we know what our rights are. That's monumental in scope and size in terms of knowing that we're not going back to the way things were, no matter who calls for it, no matter what they accuse us of. We have people in powerful positions. We have governors. We have senators. We have members in the House of Representatives. I mean, we are not who we were back then. And that's a tribute to how this community was able to grow, shape itself, and form first through pre-Stonewall, then through Stonewall, then through HIV/AIDS, then through marriage, ability to serve in the military. I mean, these are monumental achievements, and we're not going back. And we're not going back because we know how to organize. We know how to raise money. We know how to do the things that are vitally important that not only protect us, but also protect the partners that we brought in over the course of this long history from the civil rights movement, from the women's movement, and from all these other communities that were the bedrock that we built on.
I love what you say about not going back, and I obviously agree and support that. But there's times, especially present day, where it feels sometimes like we take 10 steps forward, many, many more steps back. How do you see that in the broader context of things? Because I think sometimes, like I said, in that moment, it feels kind of defeating. But to your point, there's a lot of things in place that are going to prevent us from going all the way back. How do you kind of put everything in perspective there?
History is like a flowing river, and history is filled with change and progress. And every now and then, beavers build dams that hold that water back. But eventually, the power of the water pushes down the dam and the water flows again. When we are complacent, the ugly aspects of human nature rise their head above that stilled water. It's not that history is repeating itself. It's that the bad things never really go away. They're always there. But when we're not vigilant, so what we're seeing now is a period of time where we thought things were so good that we would never have to worry about those things again. And so those who oppose us for their own political reasons have stuck their heads above the water again. They cannot win because that's not the direction of history. As Martin Luther King said, the flow of history goes towards justice. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the gist of it. And that is the reality. And that is our reality. So when we take a step back, we're taking a step back or being pushed back because others are asserting themselves. And we have to remember that when that happens, we have an obligation to assert ourselves. we have to learn from our mistakes. We have to learn from history. I'm completely confident that when we come out of this, as we came out of AIDS, as we came out of all of these other obstacles, that we will be a much stronger, much better integrated, and much more proficient community, and with organizations that are able to overcome even more. So unfortunately, we go through bad times in order to find better times. And I certainly am one that wish we didn't have to do it. But until we learn the real way of learning history, we are bound to make our mistakes again and again, because our mistakes do not go away unless we find the root causes and unless we deal with the root causes. And it's very hard for us to do that as human beings. So we put Band-Aids on, and Band-Aids come off. And when those Band-Aids come off, we find ourselves in positions that we were hoping to avoid, but avoidance is not a solution.
Yeah. And I find your words very inspiring. I absolutely do. And I think that this community obviously is one that's been fighting the good fight for quite some time. And I think that there was this time where, you know, to your point, it wasn't, I don't even know if I would call it complacency. It just felt like, okay, we can breathe now, right? Like things don't feel as intense as they once did. And I live in San Francisco, probably the most, if not one of the most liberal cities in the world. And there's even moments where like I question, should I be, you know, walking down the street holding hands with my boyfriend in 2023, almost 2024. And it's like, how are we still there? There's these forces, to your point, that, you know, cause you to constantly still look behind your shoulder. And I don't know. It feels like we've just made so much progress, but then not. And I think that people like you helping put that into context is super helpful.
And I think that you have to remember that there are Black people and brown people that also have to look over their shoulders. And Asians are looking over their shoulders. Muslims are looking over their shoulders. Women are looking over their shoulders. So, of course, LGBTQ people doing things that are not 100% the norm are going to look over their shoulders. There's nobody who has the luxury of ignorance. And we are part of all of those other communities. So, of course, we're going to be looking over our shoulders, whether it's because of our gayness, our lesbianism, our bi, our trans, or because we're of color, or because we're of another minority group, or another group that is, you know, pushed to the side. We're part of all of those communities. We're the only community that is in every single other community. But we don't always pull from them. We sometimes marginalize them as well. So we're not learning from them when we marginalize them. And if we did, we would be the synthesis that brings the kind of change that most people are truly hoping for. I'm hoping that as members of the LGBTQ community, we can become that synthesis that pulls Black and Asian and Jew and Muslim and Christian and male and female and everything in between together, and put together that fabric that says, ha, this is why we make these mistakes over and over again. And now we don't have to, because we have that complete story, a full rendering of what history is. And we can finally learn from it in a way that is actionable so that we can move forward and enjoy the change. But when you say people may not be complacent, but taking a breath, we do not, just like so many others, have the luxury of taking that breath. And the reality is that even those who you may think have the luxury of taking that breath, most of them don't feel that they have it either. The white supremacists feel that everything is being taken away from them. This group feels that everything is being taken away from them. This other group feels the same. So nobody has that luxury until we deal with the root cause problems that are facing our society. We've got mental illness. We've got healthcare issues. We've got disparities in housing and education. These are causes, these are issues that our community has to deal with, because our people and the other communities that we're a part of all suffer because we do not. So Yes, it would be nice to say, we've accomplished marriage. Now it's time to take a breath. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury. And one of the reasons we don't have that luxury is because so many people take breaths at the same time. If everybody takes a breath, then who's holding down the fort?
Yeah. And I love what you said about being part of the fabric and having that visibility into kind of other people's circumstance. And one of the things that I've always felt in my life personally is that being gay has been such a gift because I grew up in white middle class suburbia. And I think that my life would be very different if I didn't have this part of me that I was exposed to and had to work through, because it gave me a level of empathy and it helped me see the world from a different perspective. And that there were people that, were slighted for things that were completely out of their control. Right. And why was that happening? And it caused me to question. And so I, I definitely think that it's been a gift in that respect because it's helped me empathize with other people who are going through maybe not similar things, but similar things. And I love how you articulated that because I thought it was very eloquent. Tell me more about how you see history playing a role in shaping, responses to contemporary issues.
Our responses to contemporary issues are all based on either learning about history or ignoring history. And where we are today, we have seen happen many, many times before. The 1970s with Anita Bryant has very little difference than what we're seeing today in Florida, Texas, and other parts of the United States. The fact is that those people learned something from the Anita Bryant experience. They learned that she didn't have elective office. They learned that she couldn't appoint judges. They learned that they couldn't necessarily pass reams and reams of legislation. So they prepared for their reassemblance of taking the lead on these cultural war issues. But the culture war has been with us for quite some time now. And this is part of that movement. And what is the culture war? This is an assumption by the masses that they are following leaders who are pointing them in the direction that God wants them to go in. Well, I remind people periodically when I don't feel under threat that God, if you believe in God, created the earth in 6 days and on the seventh day rested, brought lightness where there was dark, created life in all its forms. I don't think God really needs people's help. God would just need people to be good and to treat others with respect and dignity. So all these people who are telling other people how to behave based on their understanding of God have got it wrong. God doesn't need your help. If God could create Earth and all the planets and the universe and everything beyond the universe, then hardly is in need of each individual human being telling other people what to do and how to behave. The culture war is a tool for others to gain political power by dividing rather than uniting. Uniting is hard. Dividing is easy. And we see a lot of division. We see a lot of antipathy. We don't see a lot of effort to find the commonality between us. And that, once again, is a very big part of LGBTQ history in the sense that our community is, as I said just before, is found in every community. You can't go to a religion, a color, a place of origin where you won't find someone who's gay or lesbian or bi or trans. And it's always been that way. Always. That's the history that we should be looking at. That's the history that we should be bringing out. These are shared values of being human beings. And we cross every line and dot every T and make the world better because we bring all of these other elements into the community that we call ours. The music, the design, the science, the education, the art. I mean, it's tremendously amazing. And each thing that we bring with us adds value, not only to where we are at this moment, but through everything that we've come through to get here. So I think that it's much more exciting and much more positive than it is negative, although we are going through difficult times right now.
Yeah. And I think as it pertains to the current landscape, I think that at least it feels to me that there's a lot of folks from older generations who have a greater appreciation for things like Stonewall and, what it represents in the scheme of history. How do you speak to younger generations and younger audiences on this topic and its importance?
Once again, it's going over the history. You have to know where you've come from to know where you're going. You have to know what has happened before you in order to understand what's happening to you, and so that you can understand how you can make a difference. And so it really is one of the exhibits that I started here the end of last year was called Standing on the Shoulders of Heroes. And it's an exhibit of posters of different people that have contributed immeasurably to the LGBTQ culture. And when we started putting that together and started asking people who should be on this initial list, it was surprising to me how many people were of color, how many were women. Because when I was growing up, it was a gay man's world, a white gay man's world. And
Yeah.
that has changed and changed for the better. And whereas in the Black community, very often it's those strong, powerful women, the Stacey Abrams of the world, that propel things forward. And in our community, it's now, to a larger extent, trans women of color who are holding up the bridges, allowing other people to cross over and looking for the support that they need in order to continue doing that work. Once again, history, the history of Black women, the history of coming out of slavery into freedom, the history of fighting oppression. We all do it in our own way. But when you're a young person and you didn't have that experience growing up, you have an obligation to learn about it. And so that's what I would say to anybody is look at the heroes, look at the people who came before you, look what they had to overcome, look at how they had to stand up time and time and time again in order to make the possible possible.
What advice do you have for LGBTQ plus individuals and anyone really who is seeking a deeper understanding of this history and how can they actively engage, I guess, with the resources that you provide?
Well, we are the largest single LGBTQ plus library. We have books, we have ebooks. The best way is to read. The best way is to follow your heroes and heroines. I think everybody is just a hero now. I don't think we have to have gender with that anymore. Find who they are, read their life stories, read their writings. I think that we learn about ourselves by seeing the similarities we have with others. What is it that unites us as human beings? What makes us human? And that is, for me anyway, it's the best way to see a pathway forward. So for me, there's Eleanor Roosevelt, there's Abraham Lincoln, there's Frederick Douglass, names I've mentioned before. There's Larry Kramer. There are people who put themselves on the line that don't take no for an answer, that stand back up no matter how many times they've been knocked down. Marsha P. Mason, Sylvia Rivera. These are names that we should know in and out of our community because they really put their fingerprint on the face of America in the same way that Rosa Parks did when she didn't get up from that seat. Rosa Parks wasn't the first person to do that, but she was the person at the right time in the right place that had the momentum going forward that helped change the United States, change the South, change the way we look at people of color. One person in the right place at the right time with the right people supporting her. Each one of us has that in us. And to find it in ourselves, we have to look back and see who came before us and what they were able to accomplish, to recognize in ourselves the little bit of heroism we each have.
How do you engage with folks across the aisle, as it were, folks that may not necessarily share your perspective, but be open to conversations in this realm. Is there a particular way that you engage those folks?
As long as they're open to conversation, you can engage. It's
Yeah,
impossible to engage people who have already decided that you're wrong, they're right, and there is no room for
yeah,
discussion. But the number one way to engage is always to find something that you share in common, whether it's raising of children, whether it's clean air or clean water, whether it's taxes, the way the schools run, whatever it is where you can find common ground. Maybe it's what foods you like. Once you start to demonstrate that there are as many similarities as differences, and usually more similarities than differences, you start to open up to the way people think. Also, it's essential to first walk in their shoes as best you can to understand why they got to where they are. Then you're less likely to trip yourself up and make the mistakes in engaging in that initial conversation that will make it a conflict rather than an embrace of humanity. It's not easy,
yeah.
that's for sure.
I'm trying to ask that question of all my guests as of late because it's something that I'm particularly curious about, right? How do we find the common ground? How do we build these bridges, between whether it's different communities, whomever, to achieve what we really do have as a lot of shared goals, right? And I love that you touched upon, some of the commonality there because I think that's how we start to build these bridges and come together because we have to do something, right? We have to engage each other,
Look,
even if we
there are
disagree.
people on the right and left that like Starbucks. There are people who are on the right and left who like
Totally.
donuts. There are people on the right and left who like pizza or Chinese food or whatever it is. And if that's where you start, then that's where you start. You know, the
Yeah.
the the lower down the totem pole you can start in finding commonalities, the easier it is to build up. Don't try to start at the top. Don't try to start in the areas where people are most unwilling to change. People are willing to, oh, you put that in your coffee? I don't, I put this in my coffee. Okay, so try what they're doing. That's an easy
Yeah.
place to make the change. On religion, on politics, those are much more difficult places to start your engagement.
Now, you've obviously seen the impact of your work on a global scale. I'm curious, what inspires you to continue your efforts and what goals do you hope to achieve in the future?
My inspiration comes from, I mean, my kids aren't kids anymore. They're adults, but I still want them to live in a world that was as good as I thought mine was when I was a kid and better than the one that they're inheriting. And as long as I have air in my lungs, that will be my goal. I want my children, my sister's children, and everybody's children to really live in the world that we could have and the world that I know is available to us if we try. I can't think of any other way to spend my life and feel good about it at the end of every day.
What advice would you offer someone listening who might want to become more engaged in whether it's promoting human rights, democracy, kind of regardless of their background or location?
Well, one of the easiest things to do is get yourself a copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which will be 75 years old on December 10th of this year. It's still one of the great secrets. Most people don't even know there's a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was the global response to the Holocaust and World War II. It figured out that by respecting human dignity, we can overcome almost all the odds set against us. And yet government and business and other entities have kept it largely a secret for 75 years. It's time for it to explode on the planet and give everybody the hope that it was intended to generate. So that's the first step. Take those 30 articles that you'll find in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and make them a part of your everyday life. Every single one of them. Make them who you are. Make them a part of your DNA. Live that way. If you do just that, you will change your community, you will change your family, and you ultimately will change the world. It will also lead you to working with organizations, institutions, people who also share those goals and objectives. And that will give you many, many more outlets to achieve those objectives and goals.
I'm curious if you have any advice for people who want to actively support LGBTQ plus rights and become allies. And even if they're not directly, they may not identify with the community, but they want to help. They want to do something to show their support.
Find an organization that's nearby. Find a national organization where you can contribute and get information. Find out what's going on in your neighborhood. Those are the best ways to make those kinds of differences. Write letters to the editor, write op-ed pieces. Do what you can to call attention to the positives and bring out the negatives, but offer solutions. Don't just point out the bad without trying to find a way to respond. I think that it's all too easy for us to keep pointing to what is bad, but all we do is diminish chances of hope going forward if we don't offer solutions. So look for solutions. Look for ways of solving the smallest of problems. Figure out ways that you can do something, that you can contribute to something, that you can be a part of something that's bigger than yourself. And I think that all of those things then ultimately come together. The more you put yourself out there, the more you do, the more open you are, the more receptive you are to the kinds of things that will lead you where you want to go. We want people to become involved with Stonewall. We're looking for many ways to lend exposure to all we have to offer across the whole country. If you want us to be in your community, contact us. Let's try to explore ways where we can help you and you can help us. We're just one institution. There are many, and there are many doing different things, whether it's healthcare, whether it's specific educational responsibilities, whether it's archives, whether it's the library, whether it's museums. Whatever interests you, there is something out there that will make a difference in your life and in the lives of the people around you.
I like to end all my conversations with this question. What has you hopeful?
What has me hopeful is the river of history. I know that it gets better. I know that it will continue to get better. And I know that there'll be hardships along the way. That's just part of life. But as long as we continue to believe that hope is possible, that the future is brighter than the past, it will be. And that's what keeps me going.
Well, Robert, I want to say thank you so very much for your time today and this incredibly insightful and inspiring conversation. Please tell folks listening how they can connect with you.
The best way is through our website, which is stonewall-museum.org. That's the easiest way. And there are emails and phone numbers, and we are open to talking to anyone at any time, anywhere, and sharing what we have with you. So please, stonewall-museum.org, and come join us.
All right. I want to thank my guests today for sharing their insight with us. And I'm incredibly grateful to you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this conversation. I hope it left you better and smarter. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe and leave a review for the show wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have an idea for a future guest or a particular topic you'd like me to cover, you could email me directly, hello@thinkoutside-the-lines.com. Now may you go out into the world today and leave things better than you found them. For more information, please visit thinkoutside-the-lines.com.